today's video tutorial where I'm going to show you how to sew this cute little turtleneck shirt. The shirt is drafted for stretchy knit fabrics and you can choose between 3 different sleeve but also 3 different body lengths. It's a very quick make and it doesn't contain any difficult steps, so I would say it's definitely a beginner friendly make as well. It's always easier to sew this shirt if you have an overlocker because the seam will be more stretchy and more durable. But if you don't have an overlocker, you can just use your regular sewing machine and set it to a small zigzag stitch. I always recommend to make a testing seam before so you can see if the seam is nice and flat, and also to make sure if it's stretchy enough. To make this shirt you will need fabrics, and I would recommend knit fabrics with a stretch content of 60 to 80%. That means that you can stretch your fabric to 1.6 to 1.8 of its width. I will explain that in the next chapter in detail because it's very important. You can use any kind of knit fabric like viscose knit, cotton knit, rib knits or any other knit as long it meets the stretch requirements. If you want to use a rib knit, I would recommend to look for a rib knit with at least 5% elastane because there are different types and not each one is suitable. Apart from the elastane content, make sure that if you stretch it, that it will immediately jump back to its original shape, because some rib knits tend to wear out and they are not suitable for a shirt like this. It will run too large and it will not fit really good. From my personal experience, the rib knits with a wider rib are better and more suitable than the small ribs, but this is just my experience. Apart from the fabric, you will need matching thread and also optionally a twin needle to hem your shirt, but you can also just use a small zigzag stitch to hem it. To check the stretch content, place 2 pins to your fabric in the direction of greatest stretch that are 10 centimeters apart. Unfortunately, we cannot see the stretch content based on the elastane, so we always have to double check to make sure the fabric is stretchy enough. Now hold the first pin and pull at the other one and see how far you can stretch it. In this case, I can stretch it to 17 centimeters, and that means my fabric has 70% of stretch and is thus perfectly suitable. Stretch until you feel resistance. I could stretch it to 20 centimeters, that would mean 100% stretch, but we don't want our fabric to have to stretch this much around our body, so just pull moderately. You can see the recommendations in this chart. Everything below 50% is not suitable. If your fabric has 50% of stretch, choose one size larger. If it's 60 to 80% of stretch, it's a perfect stretch. And if your fabric has more than 80% stretch, you can even size down one size. Let's start cutting. As always, here is an overview with all the pattern pieces that you will need. You will need the front and back piece once in the fold, and then you will need a mirrored pair of sleeves and the collar. Transfer all the markings to the fabric with tailor's chalk or a little notch, and then mark the center at the neckline of your front and back piece. Take your front and back piece and place them together with right fabric sides facing. Pin them together along the shoulders. Stitch across the shoulders with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'm using my overlocker to do so, but you can also use your regular sewing machine and run a small zigzag stitch instead. Next, open your shirt up flat so that the right fabric sides are facing upwards. you are now seeing the armholes. You will find a marking at your front armhole, and at the sleeves there are also two markings, one at the top of your sleeve head and the other one at the side of your sleeve. Now pin your sleeve into the armhole right fabric sides are facing, match up the marking at the center of your sleeve head with your shoulder seam, and the two markings at the front will meet too. This method of sewing in a sleeve is very beginner friendly. You can also close the side and sleeve seam before and then sew in the sleeve, but I prefer this way because it's easier, especially if you are a beginner. Once you've pinned in the sleeve, repeat these steps at the other side with the other sleeve too. Once everything is pinned in place, sew in the sleeves with a 1 cm seam allowance. I'm using my overlocker here again. I would recommend to go really slowly here to avoid puckers. This is what it should look like now, and if you've sewn in both sleeves, it's time to close the side seams. Place your shirt so that right fabric sides are facing and the armhole seams meet. And now you can pin all the way from your sleeve hem down to your hem. I always use the same technique to pin long distances. I will first pin the start and stop, in this case the hem and the armpit, and then I will place a pin right in the center, and then I will place pins at the quarters. This way you can avoid your fabric from shifting, and also make sure that no fabric layer is protruding at the end of your pinned edge. Repeat these steps at the other side too, and then it's time to stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. Make sure that the sleeve seams will meet. This is what your side seams will look like now, and next we're going to proceed with the color. Take both color pieces and fold them so that right fabric sides are facing, and pin them together along the short edges. Once everything is pinned in place, stitch with a 1 cm seam allowance. This is what it should look like, and now turn one of your both color pieces right side out while the other one remains with wrong fabric side facing out, and then slide the one that you just turned into the other one so that right fabric sides are meeting, and pin the colors together along the upper, the more narrow edge all the way around. Match up the seams and also the two markings. I always place the seam allowances in opposite directions to avoid bulk, and then just pin them together all the way around. Next, stitch along the upper edge of your color. I'm using my overlocker here. I would recommend to set your differential feet lower because you will have to push your head through it, and if this seam gets too tight, you might have trouble getting into your top later. Now turn it right side out and pin both lower edges, basically the ones that are still raw, roughly together all the way around. You are pinning 2 layers of fabric and the edges are laying flush. There are the seams again, and I will place them in opposite directions again to avoid bulk. Now take your shirt and turn it wrong fabric side out so you can see the seams, and the collar will be now pinned into the neckline. There is a marking at the collar which will meet the marking at the center front of your neckline, and the seam of your collar will meet the center back marking, and then just pin it into the neckline all the way around. Right fabric sides are facing, and you are pinning 3 layers of fabric, and right fabric sides of the collar and your shirt are facing. Once everything is pinned in place, we are stitching all the way around. I am sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance here again. This is what it will look like, and now we only need to hem it. I would recommend to try on the shirt because you have the chance to shorten it and also to shorten the length of your sleeves. There are 2 centimeters of hem allowance included, and once you're pleased with the length, just fold the hem 2 centimeters to the wrong fabric side and pin it in place all the way around. And now we're doing the same thing at the sleeve hems. Just fold them 2 centimeters to the wrong fabric side and pin it in place all the way around. The sleeve hem is quite small, so it's a little bit fumbly, but you can do it. Next I'm going to stitch. I'm using my twin needle and I'm stitching 1.5 centimeters away from the edge. I find it quite helpful to set a long straight stitch, and to set the upper thread tension as high as possible. This way I have no problems using the twin needle, but you can also just stitch with a small zigzag stitch instead, and I'm stitching along the hem but also along both sleeve hems. Now that was the last step. I hope you enjoy your new shirt.